Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Here we are. Let's give ourselves a hand. We showed up. We made it. Got through that dreadful 405. I am Marlene Braga, Head of Public Programs for Skirball Cultural Center, and it is, again, just such a delight and an honor to welcome you all to a conversation with Ezra Klein in partnership with our beloved colleagues and the founder, Andrea Grossman of Writer's Block. This beautiful book, Abundance, we are going to get into it really quickly. For those of you who haven't joined us before, the Skirball is a place of meeting guided by the Jewish tradition of welcoming the stranger and inspired by democratic ideals, hope, and discovery. If I may, to quote Monty Python, we're not dead yet. And so real quick show of hands, I just want to see who's here for the first time. Wow, look, you did this. Amazing, and you had something to do with this too. So with that, I just want to welcome to the stage so that we can continue the conversation that has started since the founding of the Republic. I would like to introduce someone who is very dear to us, Andrea Grossman, Writer's Block, a dear friend, colleague, co-conspirator. Thank you.
Wait, I haven't been here since the founding of the Republic. I'm not that old. Okay. Thank you for coming to today's Writer's Block event with the Skirball featuring Ezra Klein. Please turn your cell phones off because we want to hear him, not your phones. I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 29th season. Thank you. Before we get to today, I want to thank my friends here at the Skirball who parted the Red Sea to make sure that we could do this event today. And I want to thank Ezra for agreeing to spend his Saturday with us when he's here in LA visiting his family. So, now for today. Ezra and his friend, journalist Derek Thompson, have written a great book called Abundance about how we can solve problems to move America forward. It's a guidebook for Democrats on how not to be our own worst enemy in terms of blocking progress with knee-jerk response to policies set in motion decades ago when life was different. It's about how we need to rethink regulations that have been hallmarks in progressive identity, regulations that were set in place 40 years ago and have come back to hamstring us. Life was different then. Derek and Ezra posit that we need to move from NIMBYism to YIMBYism, and fast. Ezra and Derek argue that this is not economics, it's politics and social justice. And Ezra will explain how we need to make things easier to progress here. So here's what's going to happen today. Ezra loves his readers and listeners, and he wants to take advantage of this casual Saturday afternoon to talk to you and answer your questions. So after he's through giving a brief yak, we welcome you to hit the microphones, which are going to be here and here, and you can ask questions, not speeches, okay? No speeches. We're going to be guarding those mics. After the event, Ezra is going to sign copies of Abundance, and you should get them because it's already March. It's only been 2 months, okay? We have to move forward, and this helps us to do so. And it helps us to rethink what we need to do. So, no photos, as I recall, no photos and no personalizations in the signing line. Am I right? Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ezra Klein.
All right. Thank you all so much for being here on a Saturday. My God, those lights are bright. Can they be less bright than that? Is that possible? The main, they're just two that are like weaponized. Thank you all for being here. It's great to be here at the Skirball Center. Great to be here with Writer's Block. Just weird to me that people like to come see these things. You can just listen to the podcast. It's the same, basically. I do have a new book, Abundance, and the problem with a book tour is you begin to say the same thing. You become an automaton version of yourself. You can sort of begin to watch yourself disassociating. Me and Elon Musk, always disassociating. Half of you got that and half of you didn't. So I want to do something a little bit different here and make this not me giving a big speech, not me doing a big thing with a moderator. If you would like to hear somebody interview me, the podcast feed is full of it. And leave as much possible time here for questions as I can. Just do as many questions as we can get through. It can be about the book, it can be about the moment, about the podcast, about some episode you have to remember, whatever you're feeling. I'll do 5 minutes on the book, though. Abundance. The first sentence of it is, to have the future we want, we need to build and invent more of what we need. The first sentence, in a way, is an answer. I've come to think on the book tour, maybe I should have started it instead with the question. The thing we are trying to do here, me and Derek, is refocus more politics, liberal politics in particular, but not only, on what we think of as a more constructive question. What don't we have enough of? And how do we get it? And it's been interesting as we've gone around and talked about this, and more interesting as I've signed on occasionally to Twitter and seen what people think of it, to kind of see the way people, they want it to code neatly. They want everything to code neatly. So the book talks at times about deregulation, and you can just watch people shut down. Deregulation, that's a word Republicans use. Okay, but is the end something here that Republicans want? Or do you also want high-speed rail? Is the end something that you have been able to achieve or no? So some of the book, what you would need to get there, like building more market rate housing, is deregulation. Some of the market, the private sector. Some of it, to get what you would want, like public housing, you need to unleash rules on the government. Some of it, to get what you want, like innovation, you need a stronger government, bigger, more capable of spending money, more capable of pulling things forward into the present from the future. Some of it, to decarbonize, you're going to need to do both at once. A lot of it, you're using the government to shape markets, but all of it, you're trying to ask this question and work backwards, which is to say, what do we need more of, and how do we get it? When Derek and I were writing the book, the thing we spent the most time talking to each other about is, how do we decide what the set of things we need more of are? That's actually the hardest question to me of abundance. Because we got abundance of plenty of stuff right now. Abundant flat screen televisions, abundant fossil fuels. We have an abundance, I like this line from the book, we have an abundance of things that fill a home, and a scarcity of the things that you need to build a life. So when we did it, and other people have different answers, we came down with these. That to build the future we want, we need housing to be abundant in a way it isn't, particularly not in the places that people most want to live. We need clean energy to be abundant, not just good enough to keep running our current economy without triggering devastating levels of climate change, but actually abundant. Energy abundance that would make things possible in the future that are not possible today. We would like an abundance of a capable government that can finish the things it starts. I grew up in California. They started high-speed rail before I left. Came back, it wasn't finished. But it's true in a lot of places. Second Avenue subway in New York, a disaster. Big Dig, not so good. It's not that government can't build things. You go to Europe, they can. It's not that unions can't build things. In these countries that build better than we do, union density is higher. It's that we can't. That should embarrass us. We should change it. So government, capable government. And then we spend a lot of time on technology. The last 2 chapters of the book, invent and deploy. Technology makes new lives possible. My wife, who I love, is kept alive by shots of insulin. If she was deprived of them, she would die. Probably a lot of people in this room are kept alive by pharmaceuticals of one kind or another. I spent a lot of my career working on universal health care. Still work on universal health care. Still want to see our health insurance system better than it is. But the salient fact of health care for most people is what it can get them. Once you have insurance, and most of us do, well, can it actually treat the thing that might kill you or kill the person you love? We could have had GLP-1s 30 years ago. We invented these things 30 years ago. We could accelerate pharmaceutical innovation. We could accelerate clean energy innovation. The only shot we have on climate change is the miracles we have made possible with solar and wind and battery manufacturing. Progressivism needs to put technological advance at the center of its vision for how to make life better. Justice is in part a function of technology, not all technology. Technology can be an accelerator of want, it can be an accelerator of inequality, it can go bad, it often does. But it can go good too. And part of when it goes bad or when it goes good has to do with the politics you place around it. We could right now set out 10 prizes of $5 billion each for AI or any other approach that could solve 5 problems we really care about. And if you solve that problem with AI, you get $5 billion, you're rich, and we get the solution. Instead of just hoping that surveillance advertising or subscription gets us the artificial intelligence we want. That we have created no public structure for AI to do what we want of it speaks to the poverty of how we think about technology. What do we want more of, and how do we get it? That's the central question of the book. And from there, we're open to a lot of solutions. Some might be big government, some might be less government, some might be more market, less market, some might combine many of those at once. But the point is not to make everything code correctly, not to put it all on the sign and have nobody worry about the language. It's to actually get to the outcomes. An ideology measured by what you achieve, not what you spend or what you pass or who you kick out of the tent. With that, we've got mics somewhere. Abundance of mics.
We have them one right by the stairway over there.
This one facing me next to the stair.
And we want to turn that mic around,
Yeah, I think
but
that,
I bet somebody can.
Right.
And there's this mic over here. And while we're waiting for people to come
could
on.
we move these 2 mic stands, one there and one right there, so people can see who's talking? That's perfect. Thank you so much. And so people can line up. I will try to keep my answers not so abundant so we can move through things.
So,
which is hard. I'm a podcaster.
So my first question, I'm going to start it off because I have the mic right now. On one of your recent podcasts, you said people who listen to your podcast are weird.
Yeah, I mean, look around.
Yeah. So, can you explain?
The most important divide in politics isn't left-right. It's interested, uninterested. You all could be outside right now. Do you know that? It's lovely. And yet you're here, breathing recycled air, while I talk to you through my... You need me to explain why these people are weird? One of the problems, I think, in politics, though, when you look at polling of what happened in 2024, Democrats won people who pay close attention to the news, and they lost people who don't. That's about as simple a model as you need to explain the election. Donald Trump absolutely wrecked Democrats among people who don't follow politics closely, which creates a problem. How do you persuade somebody of your politics when they're not listening to you in the first place? So recognizing that your politics cannot be tuned to people who have read the course, completed the college class, to people who are following the New York Times, that's a really important starting point. And recognizing the left and the right are not perfect at mentally modeling each other, but they're not terrible at it either. In a way, someone who is across town listening to Ben Shapiro is, I think, more comprehensible to this room than someone who has no idea who the Speaker of the House is at all and hasn't known for the past 5 people. The nature of that information flow is much harder, I find, for people in politics to think about clearly. But it's actually the more important information flow. You're not going to convince the people listening to Ben, but you actually get them. They're like you, they just believe the other thing. But it's the people who actually would never, under any circumstances, go there or come here, who not only do you need to win, but who you need to serve. Politics is not about the people who love it as a hobby, or even the people who see its central importance in their lives. It's about the people who are just going through their days and are exhausted or have no interest in it, but still deserve a well-governed country. Politics can't be about the language that we all in this room like. It's not about the arguments that people like on my podcast most. It's about an ambient sense, and a felt sense, too, of who actually has your interests at heart. Sir?
Give me just 1 second. We're going to do a logistical move. If all of you could just come over here, we just don't want to block sidelines, our apologies. So this group, and then when you're done, sir, the next person comes up.
Thanks.
Thank you all for your grace.
Oh, I love when people use the word grace in conversation. I do. I think it's such a beautiful word. Okay, sir.
Yes. So on your podcast with Tyler Cowen recently, you said that one of the biggest challenges to the book was the problem of voice. How does voice fit in with abundance and having things built? And so I would just love to hear you talk about, because a lot of the regulations and stuff that have come out from 40, 50 years ago came because when highways and all those things were built, they were built over, minority communities and things like that. And so how is it, given our current political system and how, you say even and then the people that have time and money and power are the people who show up at the meetings, that this abundance agenda just doesn't become all the poor communities get literally bulldozed over, and then, the richer communities kind of get to keep their nice shorelines and everything.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, voice is hard. Not because it's specifically hard for this book, but because it's hard, and we've failed. We have a lot of research now on who shows up to notice and comment periods in regulations. And it's not the people I was talking about a minute ago, the people who don't like politics, but are nevertheless subject to it. And we know a lot about who comes to the planning meeting and city council meeting and lines up to say they don't want affordable housing on their block. It's not the people who might live in that affordable housing. And at the same time, of course, the people who live in that community should have a voice in what happens in that community. And of course, the people who would be most affected by regulation should have an opportunity to come in and say, hey, I know something about this, and you're missing something here. Voice is fundamentally, at its best, a way of surfacing information. What it can become at its worst is first captured. So what you have done is create a distorted mirror of what the community really is. You, the elected, think that people showing up at this meeting are the community or the affected group, but they're not. They're just the people who show up at the meeting. Or the other problem is we connected voice and legalism. And that's a place we really went wrong. Because it's one thing to come up and say, I was at as part of the reporting that led to this book, I used to go to SF council meetings sometimes to hear people talk about whether or not things should get built. You know what people don't like is 5G towers. I watched the line, because I was there to see about a apartment building. It's like, before we get to that, we're doing the tower. Nobody, it turns out, wants a 5G tower. But people like 5G. So something was going wrong there. Okay, but that was fine, because all these, RFK Jr. types lined up, said that the 5G tower was going to destroy everything. And then at the end, the city council person was like, okay, anyway, moving on to the affordable housing. The problem is when then you just sue. And you don't sue because the thing is bad. You sue because you say, you know, I think that you didn't fully consider every possible consequence of building a 47-unit affordable housing building. California High-Speed Rail. They began environmental clearance on this pro-environment project in 2012. By the time I finished the book and was doing fact-checking, at the end of 2024, they were almost finished. The average environmental review assessment now is 4.5 years. Suing to extend that is very powerful. So it's not that I don't want people to be able to speak, but democracy itself is a way of aggregating voice. The people who get elected are ultimately, in theory, the ones subject to democratic accountability. And yes, there are certain kinds of intense voice they should hear more intensely. But what we've allowed for is capture. And I'm not saying that if you go into a world where building happens more often, you will never have projects that shouldn't have happened. I'm not saying that. Everything is a trade-off, and everything will have failures. But I think a lot to your point about marginalized communities, about the problems now faced by not getting things done. Climate change is not going to be worst on the rich. And if you want to know why we started building high-speed rail, to hold that example for a second, between Merced and Bakersfield, it's because the money the federal government gave had in it a preference for building that happened near disadvantaged communities, as it was called there, that had particularly bad air pollution. So we started to build in Fresno, which is fine, but it made it so it never developed the political capital to actually finish. And so it never actually did anything for the air pollution in that community the way actual high-speed rail would have done. And so you can have things go wrong by building too much, but what we've started to do is now we can't keep things from going wrong by building anything. And I think we've ended up in the wrong equilibrium.
Thank you. So full disclosure, I'm a huge fan, and I think you're brilliant.
I'm glad you disclosed that.
Yes, but the second disclosure is more important. I haven't read your book, but I think I understand the premise. And I think it's a great premise, but I'm concerned because I think it potentially is missing what I would consider the larger picture. And the larger picture to me is the reason that we aren't able to do the things to make our lives better are some of the things you're talking about, but the bigger piece is our tax structure that has been decimated over the last 40 years, starting with Reaganomics, right? And our huge wealth gap. And the lack of the amount of money needed to achieve these things. So all of the things you're talking about, I think are like kind of like noise in the wind as a consequence of our lack of tax structure. If we had tax structure, I think these things would move forward.
Yeah. You all really want this to be true. I spent a lot of time as a tax policy reporter, and there are a million ways I would improve our tax system. It is, and there are ways in which our tax system does make certain things harder to get done. It is not really behind any of the problems in this book. So a couple things, because I think it's important. One of the things I've been thinking about on this tour is what villains are liberals comfortable with, and which are they not. We have a more progressive tax code today than we did when Ronald Reagan was in office. I see you looking, but we do. We've just passed a huge number of, we've continued to barbell out the tax code through both tax cuts and tax increases. Because what Republicans do is they cut taxes, what Democrats do is they raise taxes on rich people. Democrats almost never now raise taxes on anyone in the middle class, which does make it hard to fund things, but we deal with that by just increasing the deficit endlessly. So we actually have a quite progressive tax code. Joe Biden increased taxes on corporations and the rich by quite a bit. Donald Trump might cut it, but he hasn't yet. It just isn't the case that we don't have that Reagan destroyed the progressive tax code. Like, I can show you the tax policy charts. Nobody likes it when I do that. It's very smug and annoying. But then the other thing is you need to be able to use the money. I am not indifferent to the way the tax code is structured. But to hold on the high-speed rail example for a second, though, I can use others if people prefer. That's a project that was projected to cost to finish the LA to SF line $33 billion. By the time of Brown in 2018, it was then projected to be $76 billion, and now just Merced to Bakersfield is $36 billion. They told me that to do the whole line would now be $110 billion. So we've gone from a project that would be 33, they thought, to 110. California cannot tax its people that much. It just can't. It cannot raise $110 billion to do this, as they all admitted to me. So the problem there is how much money you're raising, not how much, I'm sorry, the problem is your ability to spend the dollars you have raised. I know a lot of people who are very angry about the taxes they pay here. And they never say to me, really, just that the taxes are too much. What they say to me is that they don't feel they're getting anything. Your ability to raise and sustain a highly progressive, highly broad-based tax system is not inconsequentially related to your ability to prove to people in their day-to-day lives that those taxes are well spent and they're getting something for their money. People in the Scandinavian countries are not pissed about how much taxes they pay, even though it's higher than it is here. But people here are pissed because they look outside and they see things falling apart. They're taxed more than ever, that is true, and they don't see the world they live in getting better. They're taxed more than ever and they're not safer. They're taxed more than ever and their roads are not better. We just raised a bunch of money in the Inflation Reduction Act to spend on green energy. Brian Deese, who negotiated that act, Biden's former National Economics Council director, just wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs about how it's just not going to work if they don't make it possible to build these things. Not because they don't have the money, but because they can't get the permits. So I am a tax and spend liberal. If it were up to me, we would have a wealth tax. We would have a value-added tax. I would make it so Elon Musk had a lot less money than he does. But you could take $250 billion out of Elon Musk's pocket. And unless you make it possible to use that money well, you will not have improved people's lives. And that's the problem, I think, right now that the left faces. One reason this book doesn't do a lot of tax policies, I think we basically have the right views on tax policy. I don't have an edit to make. The people who run tax policy for Democrats, they're pretty good. They figured it out. We should pass more of their bills. The big problem right now to me is not the tax structure of the US, maybe at the very, very highest end for wealth, although wealth is tricky in a bunch of ways, but doing a kind of corporate minimum tax internationally. That's the big thing we should get done. And they began trying under Biden. But there is more to governing well than taxing the rich. You got to be able to take the money you got from them and then show the people who you're trying to sell on this that their lives are better, and that's the part we're failing at. The difference between California and Texas, why we're losing people here, we have a much more progressive tax code in California, and the working class is leaving California for Texas because we are not building enough houses for them to be able to afford their life.
Yeah, thank you.
You have a Skirball shirt.
I do.
Yeah, you're repping.
Yes, I do. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. This is such a cool opportunity. Based on reporting that you and others have done, it seems that Donald Trump's 2024 victory generally falls into two pieces. The first being an economic or material piece, inflation, and the second being a cultural piece. And I haven't read your book yet, obviously, but it seems to me that your book primarily addresses this material piece. Mm-hmm. So how do we fix material scarcity in the United States? If Democrats are interested in returning to power and being able to implement the kinds of changes that you're talking about in this book, what advice would you give to them about that second piece, how to regain cultural capital and fight, I guess, these conservative forces in an effective way?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, this book wasn't written for Donald Trump. I mean, it wasn't written thinking he wouldn't come back to power, but it was written to be neutral about that question because we didn't know for most of it who would win the next election. But it's true. Trump and right-wing populism in general, which exists in many countries, is driven somewhat by material questions, but not, I don't think primarily. I think it's driven primarily by cultural questions. I think the swing voters are driven much more by material questions. So I think of this as having like different dimensions. I guess here's how I would put it. There's a debate right now that usually uses the words like, do you want to moderate or move to the center, or do you want to, I don't know, be woke? I don't think that's actually a very good way to think about what's pretty multidimensional. Yeah, Democrats got way out of step culturally. There's no doubt about it. And because they were in power, Republicans got to define the politics around the edge cases. So the participation of trans sports, right? Would you have a trans woman competing in NCAA swimming? I think Democrats are, at this point, happy to sacrifice that question. But it was also always a pretty marginal question. The question of trans rights and trans discrimination broadly is not a marginal question. That's a lot of kids, a lot of people. Immigration. They just let chaos happen at the border. It was a huge fucking mistake. And people saw it happening. I always think about if what Greg Abbott did, and the Texas governor was busing people all around, and then Ron DeSantis was and other people, but Abbott was the one who started it. Abbott was able to overwhelm big blue cities, right? New York City, right? We're not like a small, like a suburb of Atlanta. Like, they overwhelmed New York City with bodies. Not billboards, bodies. Enough people were coming through that they could actually overwhelm the city by just sending them there. The problem was real. But I wouldn't say that enforcing the border compared to where they were is like a moderate solution. Because it would actually get you more of what you want. We would have a better, healthier politics about immigration, including letting immigrants in right now, if we had done a good job at the border. We would have a better, healthier politics around trans rights and LGBT rights if Democrats had been more willing to draw the line where they thought, can't go farther than that. That's not where the country is. Democrats, liberals, someone, usually not, by the way, the electeds, or not all of the electeds, but convince themselves of things that weren't true. And they convince themselves, I think partially because people get in the hothouse of social media, to listen to each other and be more afraid of the sort of blowback you would get from inside your coalition than outside of it. Really, the term, the sort of form of politics that keeps coming back to mind for me is the importance of pluralism. Really good politicians, like Obama, is this way. George W. Bush, at his best, was this way. Bill Clinton was this way. Really good politicians hold the contradictory impulses of the country inside of them. We live in a time that tends to value inside the coalitions politics of purity. Nobody gets offended. Everybody agrees that you're the champion for their cause. But the strongest politics are politics of pluralism. You have a view, but it's actually moderated by your sense of the other view. And I think for reasons, I really do think social media was a big part of what did this, but I think both parties have completely lost this. Now, the reason I don't just say Democrats should moderate, in addition to the fact that I actually don't have very moderate opinions here, and obviously my opinions are good politics, it's always important, I think it's an important principle in politics, that whatever you think is right, you should also know is politically optimal. That's how everybody does it. But when Democrats were in power, what became salient was the excesses of the things and the coalition the things that they did in the coalition they represented. But now Republicans are in power. And already, overnight, what's becoming salient are the excesses of their coalition, because you know who's not pluralistic is Donald Trump. And what is about to become salient, what has maybe already become salient, is the stomping on civil rights and the Constitution and the law, the reality that they never gave a shit about free speech. Their view of speech is boss speech. You all are going to hear a long essay on this come out from me at some point, but their view of free speech is not we should have free expression. It's you can say what the boss tells you can say. And the more power they have over you, whether through the green card or through employment or university subsidies, whatever it is, they will use that power to constrict, to make sure that they can speak freely and you are free to echo them. On immigration, they're harassing people at this point for no reason. I mean, I'm not saying the reasons they were harassing people were good, but initially people thought they understood what they were. Now it's just literally a regime of fear. Literally just the signal, we don't want you here if you weren't born here. What are they doing with this Brown University professor who runs a kidney transplant clinic? Like, it's not an activist. Do they not like kidney? Like, what the hell? So Democrats need to be ready for not the last election, but the next one. And that requires pluralism. It requires recognizing that the American people, they don't like disorder, but they don't like cruelty either. So they're going to have to be the coalition, morally and politically, that hates this cruelty, hates this lawlessness, without doing what they did after the first resistance and becoming the opposite of whatever Donald Trump was. If he doesn't like immigrants or undocumented immigrants, Democrats will begin to treat undocumented immigrants like they're an oppressed community as opposed to a genuine problem for order. If Donald Trump is bringing back the gender stereotypes and relations of the 1950s, Democrats are going to go to the 2250, right? Like, you have to hold these things in some tension inside of you. But I think they get that now. I think that's a lesson they've learned.
So first of all, I feel like I should be saying like first-time caller, long-time listener, or something like that, or left-wing megadittos, or
What you said?
left-wing megadittos. Is there a left-wing megadittos we can do? You don't even know what that is.
I'm having trouble hearing this mic. Are you?
Left-wing megadittos. You don't know what megadittos are? Does anybody here? No Rush Limbaugh haters here?
Oh, megadittos. Got it. Left-wing megadittos. Okay.
That
Sorry,
fell
the
flat.
mic is garbled up here a little bit.
That fell flat.
But that's great. I get it. I know Rush Limbaugh.
All right. If I got to explain a joke,
May he rest in peace.
Yeah, or not. So I have a question for you about your podcast when you talk about attention as a commodity, and it sort of dovetails with what you just were talking about, how you expect the Republicans are going to fall flat on their face, and we have to be prepared to have an alternative that's not just the same resistance that we had before. And this goes into the issue of, and especially in one of your last podcasts, you talked about how TikTok could just move the dial a tiny little bit, and maybe that changes the algorithm of what we hear. And as I look at the next 2 years, except for the New York Times and maybe NBC, every single large megaphone of attention is pretty much firmly in the right-wing camp. I mean, you've got X, Facebook, TikTok, ABC, CBS. They're all bending the knee, and I just wonder what ability there will be to get attention with that being what is going on. And I think about it in context like, where's all the talk about what's going on, genocide in Palestine? It's gone. There's no discussion of it. And part of me wonders if the people who decide the algorithm, the people who decide the attention, decided that the time for that is done, and now it's on to the new Laken Riley murder, or the new person killed by an immigrant, or the new person killed by a minority, or whatever it may be. And so we're thinking right now, nobody's going to stand by and watch the country get dismantled by Doge and by the cruelty. But if we can't get any attention, then what chance is there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a couple things to say about it. So one is that I do worry about the dial turning. I do worry about a world where TikTok just in the background understands their best shot as Trump, and we don't seem to be in that world yet, and we may never be in that world. It's a fear, not a fact. X, we know what it is. Like, Elon, say what you will, Elon Musk is perfectly clear about what he's made that place into. The rest of it, I don't really agree. Or not agree, but I want to maybe bring the good news to you.
Please.
Which is, the ABC and CBS are settling suits, but it's not become pro-Trump propaganda networks. I know those journalists. I know what they're doing and what they're reporting. And if the whole world was watching ABC and CBS News, again, going back to who Trump wins and who he loses, it would be fine. Another reason attention is not working for them right now is that Donald Trump has lost 13 points in national popularity since getting inaugurated, right? He has gone negative faster than anybody but Donald Trump in the past. It took Joe Biden 221 days to see his poll numbers invert. Took Donald Trump less than 2 months.
But he's still higher than he was before.
Yes, Donald Trump is beating Donald Trump 1. But no one else. I mean, look, if I were a political advisor, seeing him, I wouldn't want to be like, sir,
Tears in your eyes.
I have good news. You are currently second to last in how popular you are at this point in time, but you're not going to like who's last. Right? I'm not saying it's great. I don't think it's great. I don't think Facebook, I do not think Mark Zuckerberg is MAGA in that way. I think he's mad at his own employees. I think that which is all to say that the attentional space is contested. If you go look at who's leading podcast charts, aside from, like some good New York Times shows, like this, I forget the name of them, the brothers, yeah, whatever they all said. They're like number one on the charts right now. Huh? No, not Travis Kelce. But maybe they're doing fine too. No, there's like 3 brothers who are doing resistance podcasting. It's good. Yeah, the Midas brothers. Thank you. We just launched on YouTube like a couple weeks ago. I'm stunned at how much audience we've gotten there in 5 weeks. It's much bigger than stuff that's been there. So I don't find my experience of these places when I look at, and I have a lot of access to analytics, they have not all turned MAGA. I keep telling Democrats this. The problem Democrats ran into was not that they were in an attentional sphere that they could no longer compete in. There are places that become hostile to them, like Rogan. That is true. The problem they really faced, though, was they had stopped competing. Most of these people are not that MAGA-pilled. And definitely most of these outlets aren't, and these places aren't. But Democrats, unlike Republicans, certainly unlike Republicans who follow Donald Trump's ways, they are more worried about bad press than they are willing to get, or they are more worried about negative attention than they are hungry for attention at all. Which, in a way, as a personality type is good, because the other personality type is a sociopath. And Donald Trump has sort of done this thing in the Republican Party where it's like, you know how you get ahead here. Like, this is not what J.D. Vance used to be like. One of the scariest things about Donald Trump to me is the way the toxicity of his own soul is contagious. That so many people in the Republican Party who were not like my favorite people in the world, but were sort of normal, they now act like him in public, except they're not funny. Which is like why it's usually not great politics for them, but they're like him, but they can't make jokes. It's bad. Elon Musk, again, like Donald Trump, but not funny, right? J.D. Vance, like Donald Trump, but definitely not funny. But they all do this now in public. But what they all understand, the thing they're really trying to do is get attention, and they understand that negative attention is fine. The problem Democrats had is not that the attentional dials were all against them. It's that they wouldn't do that. Tim Walz was perfectly good at getting attention. That's why they made him the vice presidential pick. They wrapped the guy in bubble wrap. Like, all of a sudden, these great arguments he was making, like this freewheeling political style was gone. Next time you saw him, he was losing the vice presidential debate. Democrats have to get less cautious. They need to make riskier plays. I will say this for him. I have my criticisms of, like on a professional level, I have some advice for Gavin Newsom as a podcast host. I've been doing this a long time. If I were governor, he would know a lot more about it than me. But I've been doing this a while. I have some notes. But he's running a high-risk attentional play. And you know what? Everybody who's even vaguely aware of politics knows he's doing it. And that's because he's taking risks. And they're not all playing out the right way for him, I think. Maybe they are. But the fact that we are talking about him at all, the fact that I can tell you one thing he is doing is smart. So I am less worried about the platforms. I'm worried about the platforms because they're rotting everybody's minds, but like I can't fix that right now. But while they're rotting all of our minds, it's important that the Democrats are on them, trying to rot our minds in a slightly better rather than slightly worse direction.
Hi. Just given precedent, I feel obliged to disclose that I, too, am a huge fan. But I wanted to ask, the book is full of excellent ideas about sort of policy and structural changes that will enable abundance, and this sort of builds on risk-taking as well. But would you speak some about what the left or the sort of anyone to whom this book is targeted needs to do culturally and sort of interpersonally to get more comfortable with the abundance agenda? What sort of changes would that entail? You've talked about sort of the bureaucratic versus autocratic personality type and allergy to trade-offs. Do you see those as fitting in?
Oh, this is a fun question. I haven't done this really in public. Okay. Grand theory of things right here, without very much evidence. Just organize my thoughts here for a second. I know where I'll start. Okay. So I was listening to Peter Thiel on Barry Weiss's podcast. And he said something I thought was interesting. Peter Thiel said, and Peter Thiel got a lot of, in my view, bad political opinions, the fascism and stuff, but he's very smart, very, very, very smart and very perceptive. And he said, he went on this riff, and he's like, look at the Ivy League, look at the credentials of the people on the 2 tickets this year. J.D. Vance, like an absolute superstar of the Ivy League, right? Went to Yale Law, Harvard Law, I always forget which one, but you know. Sorry, I thought this part was funny. He was like, Donald Trump, he went to the Wharton School of Business. They don't take dummies there. And I was like, what? But okay, fine. But it's like Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Tim Walz, right? No Ivy League credentials there. He's like, the left has become way worse credentials. Like they're not sending their best. And Barry, to her credit, says to him, I don't know how deep you all are on Peter Thiel, but I know a lot actually about Peter Thiel. He's like, don't you hate the Ivy Leagues? Don't you give people money to drop out of them? Like, don't you have a fellowship devoted to having people not attend these colleges? He's like, yeah. All right. But he's like, and he thinks about it for a second. He's like, maybe what I'm trying to say is that at this point, the Ivy Leagues are good for the conservatives who go to them. Because they learn, they're in opposition, and they spend years sharpening their ability. If they can hold to their own views, they then spent years sharpening their ability to argue their own points and think independently against a kind of conformist liberalism. And I hate to say it, but that's kind of stuck with me. I want to walk through this minefield very carefully. Here, under these very bright lights. I think that the problem with the right is that it is unformed by institutions, most of it. Say what you will about J.D. Vance as a lawyer, but he seems to hate the Constitution now. So the right is unformed by institutions. They hate them, they don't trust them. RFK Jr., right? Like, it's all anti-institutional. The upside of that personality is it is willing to question things that are taken as received wisdom. The downside is that it doesn't know, like, when to stop, right? That can become a totalizing impulse that ends in conspiratorial thinking, right? Which is how you end up with Joe Rogan having, you know, World War II revisionists on his show. Okay. The left, as I say, its personality type is not autocratic, it's bureaucratic. The left has become obsessed with When you are raised to succeed in these institutions, over time, it becomes very hard to think outside of them. And you become conformist, not to everything they think. Like, I think it would be wrong to say that, like, you know, decolonialism theory is conformist, right? That's actually a challenge to the power structure. But it becomes hard. You get used to being within the structure of the institution itself, and you really learn to take no for an answer. And the thing I've noticed, and it's gotten worse over time in democratic governance among people I know and like, is they think like their institutions, like they're like large language models trained on Davos. And it got really bad over the last couple of years. When you have a rule-following and conformist culture, and then you have social media weaponizing those impulses within you, what you get is people who won't speak out against bad ideas, and also internally, in the meeting, where like the rules for the rural broadband program or the chips and science program or whatever getting hashed out, people won't just say no, like, we can't have that. I know it sounds good, I know it, like, it would be good for equity, like, on the thing, but like, no, it's like, the thing's not gonna happen. I love lawyers. Some of my best friends and best family members are lawyers. We should have just enough of them. But not. Tim Walz was the first person on the Democratic ticket to have not gone to law school since Mondale. The left, which part of that are you clapping for? The left, when I talk about, I think we've polarized the two parties by personality now and by their relationship to institutions. And the left is full of organization kids. And the right is full of maniacs. And like, they actually both need to be a little more mixed up. I know I said my answers wouldn't be long, but I lied. And Jared Polis, very, very successful governor of Colorado, said something interesting to me recently. That I've been, again, one of these things, when I first heard it, I was like, yeah. And then like, I was like, I was calling him to elicit something that he had said on Twitter about how his success in Colorado has been about the abundance agenda. And I was like, great, I have this book coming out, so would love to hear you say more about this. But he's sort of riffing, and he's like, I'm really upset that we've lost RFK Jr., because a lot of those people are in my coalition. Polis was one of the governors who I think actually charted the best course in the end on COVID. He believes science, not an anti-vax weirdo. But at a time when a lot of us were like, well, the people getting the most retweets who say they're experts on public health online are saying keep the schools closed forever, he didn't. He was willing to sort of listen to some other opinions, and he took the other perspective seriously. He's like, look, like, I believe we should all use masks, but I think that the level at which we need, like, you need a really high bar to cross mandate, right? Like, he ended up being right about a lot of things. And what he said about RFK Jr. is he said that these people were part of our coalition before, and they were a healthy part. I didn't agree with them on everything, but I thought it was better when they were here, not there. And he was right, because coalitions are ecosystems, not just of ideas, but of personalities. And what has happened, my friend Matt Iglesias calls it the crank realignment. All the cranks, left and right, are going to the right. Right? You can be a right-wing crank like a right-wing crank like, you know, Peter Thiel or Elon Musk, a left-wing crank like, or the, what's their name, the brothers? No, not the Midas brothers, the Weinstein brothers. We could also not be a left-wing crank like RFK Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard, but if you're a crank, you're going over there. And the left has no more, it doesn't have enough cranks, actually. Because you don't need it all in one person, but you need it all in the ecosystem, right? Anti-corporate cranks, the GMO. Like, I'm pro-GMOs, like, GMO all my food. But you don't want everybody to be me, being like, well, I read a meta-study on GMOs. Like, you need this stuff to be more mixed up than it is. Thanks.
Hey, Ezra, longtime reader from the Wonk blog days. I'm a transportation researcher at UCLA. Last year,
what kind of researcher you said?
Transportation. Last year, I got a grant from the Abundance Accelerator out of UC Berkeley to figure out what an abundance agenda would be for transportation in California. So I've figured out a lot of a framework for that, but I've been asking people who are known in the abundance movement or transportation policy circles in California what they think about an abundance agenda for urban transportation in California. So think Los Angeles, San Francisco, less statewide projects.
That's the question?
That's the question.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think?
It didn't
about
seem to have a question. What do you think it is? You got the grant.
Well, people didn't come to hear me. But I think it's an agenda that allows people to meet their areas of need. So people move in order to access goods, services, areas of need. And we have constrained transportation and land use growth in California because we are worried about the limits of auto dependency. And so to unlock that and move past it, we need to have a more multimodal and priced transportation future in California. But I was wondering if you had a perspective.
So I think, I have intuitions, but you genuinely will know this a lot better than me. I'd say a couple things. It's going to be a really hard problem in like a place like LA. It's been getting bad for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so now to unbad it is, I think, probably not possible. Like actually, like I try to be a realist about things. When you've let a policy problem get this bad, I don't actually know, like you will need some kind of huge technological innovation. Like maybe self-driving cars will actually really unlock a lot of possibilities in 10 years, mm-hmm. but it's hard to imagine. You're not going to build a subway system here. Not a real one. I would like it if you would. I just don't see it. It would require the idea that you would build a sufficiently dense subway system here. It just feels, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels fanciful, like in any kind of near-term way. Yeah, you're not telling me I'm wrong. Okay. I do think density matters a lot. Depending on if you could put more people where they would like to be, near to the places they're going, that would take pressure off, right? Some of transportation, as you, I think, were gesturing at, is land use, right? Some of it is dense building. There are a lot of people making congestion worse because they can't live anywhere near where they work. And we could make that possible to live a lot closer to where you work. There are like a lot of last mile stuff, but honestly, like I would just be babbling at a certain point. My sense is that LA transportation is a functionally unsolvable problem until something happens that is technological, that changes the way roads and sidewalks get used.
No, I agree.
Do you think I'm wrong?
No, it's either congestion pricing or bus lanes.
Yeah, that would be good.
But both seem incredibly impossible in LA, so.
Yeah, but the other problem you have here, I was actually talking about this with my brother on the way in when I was coming in from the airport. We were talking about the buses. I was like, yeah, you could do a lot of dedicated bus lanes, but you actually would need to culturally change the way, like, all of you think about buses.
Yes.
Like, it's interesting the way subways, if I was like, we're gonna make a big subway, and like, we actually can do it, everybody would be like, yeah. And if I'm like, okay, we're gonna do it, but it's gonna be above ground, and we're gonna call those cars buses. Everybody's like, I don't know about that. So I do think there's something about, like, I actually think, like, a question of how do you make buses a much more income-wise mixed-use thing, so then you have the political support to give them more lanes to themselves, is a more solvable problem than most, but a weird one that has evolved.
Thank you.
Yeah, buses.
Too tall for me. Hi. Also, full disclosure, I'm a bigger fan than those previous people who said that.
Yeah, I can tell.
Is it okay if I ask a question that's not really about what the book is about? I just want to say thank you for always ending your podcast with, can you recommend 3 books? I'm a librarian and trying to get our future... I'm an elementary school librarian, so trying to get all the future children of this world to be readers, I feel like is really important. And thanks. It's cool. But I feel like your emphasis on talking about your own life as a reader, asking your guests to speak about their reading lives, and then the conversations that you had with people like Marianne Wolfe and Ada Limon in particular, authors and people who research writing. I just think those are very important. They're very important to me personally, and I think to a lot of your listeners. So I wanted to ask you about your experience of being a person who has an important reading life and then becoming an author. How did your life as a reader affect being a book writer now? And then has your experience of now being a two-time author changed your reading life at all?
All right, a triple. All right. Well, my mother is here, and she will tell you. Aw, Mom. And she will tell you that there was a summer library reading contest that she says she won, I would say, for reading me 440 books. Wow. So you could have my mom, and that would help. And my father's a professor. So I grew up in a house that read, right? I think that really matters. Also, an important trick about reading is that if you want nobody to ever bother you, but to seem virtuous while you're trying to tune everybody out.
It's my child.
Yeah, so then you can read and your family leaves you alone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think about this a lot because I have young kids. And one thing about reading is that there is something about the takes in the person. I think best and I actually regulate myself best when I'm doing a lot of reading. It's very, very akin to meditation for me. Always has been. And actually I've come in the last couple of years, and I'm a pretty regular meditator, to prioritize it higher. Like being somewhere where I have physical books and physical magazines, my mind becomes associational. It actually unlocks a different kind of creativity for me. Being on a screen won't do it. Meditating is not the same thing. Working out doesn't give me nothing. Listening to podcasts is not as good. But not everybody, like I think about this a lot. Like a big part of my politics is that most of us don't, I think free will and personal responsibility are a much more narrow part of what defines us than we would like to believe. And I happen to have a complete obsession with something that society really rewards. I don't really like watching TV. I just don't. I read instead, right? Thank you for clapping, but I didn't earn that. Like, I'm not virtuously resisting the television. I don't care. And I obsessively read books all the time. And then people clap for the output of that, right? Like, I'm worried about so everything for me is like actually built on the reading and built on the ideas that emerge during the reading. A lot of writers have word counts per day. I don't. Because oftentimes, the hard part of this is not the writing, for me at least. If I'm having trouble writing, it's because I haven't done enough reading and reporting. And so often I'm sitting there being like, I'm not hitting my word count. What I have to do is not try to hit my word count. It's read another book on the topic and wait for either the right information to emerge or something to shake loose. But the thing that I'm thinking a lot about and worrying about right now is the earlier gentleman talked about the attention platforms and the brain rot. And I don't know. Look, reading is a strange technology that acts upon the mind. It, as Marion Wolf's work shows, right, it changes the physical structure of the brain. We are hijacking parts of the brain used for other purposes to read. I'm very good at reading. I can't find my way anywhere, right? Like some parts of my brain are strong and some parts are weak. You can have technologies that change the brain in ways that we think, at least in our current society, are good, and you can have them that are bad. And I think we've developed a bunch that are bad. And there's been a lot of great reporting and writing on how, even kids coming out like at the top of the high school heap are getting to Ivy Leagues and can't seem to read a book. And the thing I am like obsessive about, but not in a way that I do anything, just like everything else, obsessively think about it and worry, is like I don't know how to train attention in my kids, right? In a world built to destroy their attentional faculties. I was reading a thing on my way out about, it's a history of the Gilded Age. I wonder why I was reading that. And it talks about, I forget who it is, but a social reformer whose father like paid her when she was a kid to like read books and report on the classics. I was like, maybe that's it. Maybe I'll just start handing out a 5 for idea. I'm dead serious on some level, right? Like, how do I juice the dopamine of books for my kids? Now we have AI, which most people use as a technology of summary and first drafting. Great, we're gonna outsource the 2 things that make you creative. Like the 2 parts of this that actually matter. Editing, who gives a shit about editing? Like that doesn't make you smarter. I was an editor, like I can tell you, I didn't get smarter. For years, just stagnated. So, yeah, I mean, my entire process as a writer is to read and then wait for ideas to happen, and then I write them down. But like the writing them down is almost mechanical comparatively. And I grew up at a time, like in a house, but also at a time when books were plentiful and they were on paper. And now words are plentiful and they're on screens, and video is even more plentiful and it is everywhere. And I think the technologies I had formed my mind well at the time that it needed to be formed. And like, I try not to be too much of a cultural pessimist. There was just a piece in the FT that said, like, have we passed peak human intelligence? And it was showing all this data that like our literacy is going down, our test scores are going down, like, and across countries, right? I don't know. I think we've gotten, there is something very, if you're writing a sci-fi story, that feels very obvious about this moment when we've begun to destroy the faculties or degrade the faculties that make readers and make thinkers and make writers, at the same time that we've created this technology where we're like, don't worry, it'll do it for us. It's like we're accepting that we're making a handoff here in the relay. And I'm not against AI, but I am against the handoff in the relay. So that's your depressing, that's my depressing answer.
A quick follow-up.
I think I'm gonna
sorry.
keep going, sorry.
Thank you so much.
But thank you for the great questions. I'm gonna do, I know we've got people, but I know we're also, do you have time? So what I'm gonna try to do here is have 2, how many people do we have? Too many, I'm sorry. All right, I'm gonna do 2 more on each side and I'm gonna try to go quickly.
Hi, Ezra.
Hi.
Huge fan, not a competition, but yeah, huge fan. So one of my favorite things about your podcast, I think sometimes when you have opposing viewpoints like conservatives who come on, I think you articulate their viewpoints sometimes better than they do.
It's very frustrating as a host.
I can tell, actually, it's great. But when it comes to Elon Musk and Donald Trump, I'm curious, do you think, like, do you ever think they're intellectually honest or operate in good faith? Or is it entirely that they're just the big bad, they need to be opposed at all because you can't afford to offer them grace, so to speak? I'm curious about that.
You'll enjoy my Tuesday podcast, which begins with me asking somebody to steal Mandoge for me. It doesn't work. Good faith, right? What does that term mean? I think they think the world they are building is better. I think they do, in that way, operate in good faith. I think Donald Trump believes, honestly, a world where he has unitary executive powers and the entirety of the federal government operates unto him as my limbs operate unto me is a better world. I think Donald Trump believes, as he has said, that he represents the true will of the people. As leaders like him, I won't use the word that describes that kind of leader, but leaders like him have like always believed. I think he is completely honest about this. I think he has told us it again and again. It is in completely good faith. Donald Trump believes that he is right, and you are right if you agree with him, and if you don't, you are an enemy. And Elon Musk believes, and Elon Musk is a very smart person, something to the side of that. Something about the stagnation of this civilization. Something about the way America's vitality is weakening. Something about the way in which our multiculturalism, our belief that we can bring in people. There is nothing historically that interesting about a political movement that believes kindness is weakness and that believes greatness comes through violence and strength. They didn't invent it. It's not new. One of our great failures, I think, is allowing how extraordinarily unlikely and morally ambitious liberalism is to collapse as a story into technocracy. That to somehow have allowed the mundane ideas of the 19th century to regain the electricity of the new is so unfathomably depressing to me. And yet we've let it happen. And it's in good faith. I was reading on my way here this piece by conservative writer N.S. Lyons, The Return of the Strong Gods. It's built on a piece by R.R. Reno, a book by him. We tried to banish the strong gods of community and faith and nationalism and violence and all the rest of it, and now they're coming back. That like the extraordinarily unlikely experiment of the UN was a weak god. Right? The strong god is just that the strong dominate the weak. It's so lame. But I think it's in good faith. I think they really believe it. And I think if you are Elon Musk or you are Donald Trump and you have lived the life they have led, imagine how unlikely that life is. And now you are Donald Trump and you believe yourself touched by God to survive and make America great again. So you've combined his narcissism with a belief in divine selection. And you are Elon Musk, and some part of you believes that you're in a simulation in which you are one of the few characters who's actually being controlled. Yeah. You could see how, in good faith, they get to this view that the right answer is for them to lead and for everybody else to listen and follow.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say I'm just so grateful for your podcast and.
You guys, I appreciate it, but you guys can still. It's good. I get it.
I just think I've been so. I dragged my husband here. I've been so anxious about what's going on, and just being in community with live people who are like-minded. It really helps. I work at the VA. Woohoo! Civil servant, proud civil servant. Thank you. I treat veterans in a residential treatment program and we have a wonderful team, really. I'm really proud. I've worked there over 20 years. And I saw you on Bill Maher last night, and I got the vibe of the book. I guess the social workers are responsible to mitigate their trauma, to treat them therapeutically, provide groups, but also to get them housing, the veterans. Mm-hmm. And when you say, what do we need more of, I am so anxious about HUD-VASH being, terminated, all these programs, grant per diems. I guess my question to you is, I love your ideas and I learned so much, but how do you operationalize what you're saying, sort of on the front lines, dealing with 60% of my patients are homeless, and it's not easy to get them housing at all, and they deserve it.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for your work. That isn't easy work. Look, on a very fundamental level, that's what this book is about. That failure, specifically right there. The first chapter is called Build, but it's about housing. And I spend a huge amount of time in that chapter. One thing I really wanted for this book, which has its genre is manifesto, and its texture should be the lived reality of government.
Right.
Right? It's a book of details.
Right. Mm-hmm.
As much as it's like a big, I'm smuggling in a lot of wonkish detail under this solar punk cover here. There is no reason for your client base to be unhoused. There isn't. Housing's a solved technology. West Virginia is poorer. It has lower unemployment. It has higher unemployment. It is has much worse drug problems in California and not a fraction of our housing problem. I talk in that book about another book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. It has this great metaphor in it. And it says, imagine a game of musical chairs. If there are 10 chairs and there are 10 people, everybody's going to get a chair. If one of those people breaks their leg, everybody still gets a chair. But take away 2 chairs. And then that person with the broken leg, all of a sudden it really matters. And the point is, all the individual characteristics we think about that make somebody homeless, mental issues and drug addiction, and it's all real, but it matters. It becomes instantiated in homelessness when you don't build enough homes. In Los Angeles, here, where we are, you all, good job, voted for Measure H years ago, which was $1 billion to build public housing. Checked in on that, and a couple years in, 6 years in, it had built like 3,000 units of affordable housing at about $600,000 to $700,000 a unit. $600,000 to $700,000 a unit. If you gave China $1.1 billion to build housing, it would be done in 3.5 weeks. We did that with the rules. I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the chapter does go through it. And I just the thing that I want to say so much is that we chose this, not Donald Trump. You talked about all the damage they're doing to the VA, but the thing, I can't stop them right now from doing damage to the VA because they want to. They're doing it in good faith in the sense that they want to do it. We did this in bad faith. We didn't exactly mean to do it. But then having done it, we didn't do anything about it. I am in some ways angrier at liberal governance here for allowing this to happen, for caring so little about your clients that they never fixed it.
Yeah.
Because the apartment building is a solved technological problem. If you can build this, you can build that. And we just decided to stop. It's like we regressed.
Weird.
But the good news I'm here to preach is that you just don't have to. There are things that are actually really hard to do. And then there are things that are just politically hard to do. Like nuclear fusion is really hard to do. But we should make the rules such that you can build apartment buildings again is that's just politically hard to do. I was talking with my family this morning about some of these things, and we just made it illegal to build dormitories. You go back to the 19th century, the early 20th century, a lot of bad ideas in the 19th century, again, going back to that question, but dormitories were a good one. The thing where not everybody needed their own kitchen, that was fine. It's better than being in a tent under the freeway. But we've made it illegal for not everybody to have their own kitchen. Boarding houses. Lincoln wandered around this country sleeping in boarding houses. If it's good enough for Abe. We made it illegal. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And we should just make it legal. It's just...
Yeah.
Thank you. I love your podcast and Derek Thompson's as well. You kind of touched on the homelessness issue and housing, and I haven't read your book yet, but are there any organizations, particularly in LA, or I live here, that are kind of trying to break down these walls to really solve this problem?
I'm sure there are. The only ones I'd be able to tell you off the top of my head are the LA Yimbies, who are great, and I'm sure are here. And just find the guy who yelled "woo."
Is that Yimby? Why?
Yeah, Yimbies. Yes, in my backyard. And there's also, I believe, in LA, there are now abundance groups sprouting up, and I believe there's an LA abundance group. Maybe that person. I don't know. So those would probably both be good. In terms of organizations that do direct provision, which I'm sure there are amazing ones, I just haven't lived in LA for a long time and don't know them, but the Yimbies will know who they are.
Okay. Thank you, and I really appreciate how you communicate your thoughts and ideas, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. All right. And I'm sorry to all of you, but this is going to be the last question here.
All right. Unfortunately, basically, a lot of this stuff has been mentioned, or fortunately, I guess. My focus is mostly on housing, but on a more of a micro scale. I've had to change my question up a little bit, but is it for housing and building transit and just building in Los Angeles specifically, do you think it's more the liberal governance right now that's the main kind of issue, or local constituencies? Because on a small scale in Los Angeles, we've had a lot of bills lately that allow you to build high-density housing, especially in your transit. I believe it's ED1, but anytime an ED1 project was meant to be built, neighborhood groups swarmed in, and Karen Bass, the mayor, pulled back a lot of the provisions of ED1. So right now, and let's say for the next 5 or 10 years, is the real roadblock going to be local government, or the local populace and neighborhood council groups and that such?
Porque no los dos.
Yeah, right.
It's both. Those are connected to each other. I'm very, very disappointed in Mayor Bass on that.
Yeah.
That was a good bill, and she decided it was working too well, I guess. And so it gets gutted. Yes, when I say like the culture of the left is bureaucratic, the culture of the right is autocratic, liberals are going to have to learn something from Elon Musk. Not lawlessness, not brain rot, not marinating in conspiracies on your conspiracy marinade platform, but that the thing you did, the thing you believed was worth doing, is worth taking some pain to do. What I respect I respect many things about Musk and what he's achieved, but there is a relentlessness to him. And a recognition that if you get through the middle part that's hard, you get to the other part that's good. But you got to go through the middle part. And I say this with a lot of disappointment, Bass was not willing to go through the middle part. And so when she leaves this mayorship, which looks like probably is going to happen, I don't think LA's housing crisis is going to be much better. I have a piece, the piece I was talking to your predecessor at that microphone about LA affordable housing. If you go back to the original version of that piece in the New York Times, it's weaved in with 2 interviews with both Bass and Caruso, because I was writing it during the mayoral campaign. And what was her line to me? She said something like, "I want to be a hurricane for housing." Turns out it turned. You know when they're like, there's a Category 5 hurricane coming, and the next morning, there's not. She didn't go through it, and yeah, the neighborhood groups would be mad. But you know what we've seen again and again? Something I've seen this as a policy reporter over the years. People don't like the middle of policy. They really don't. The idea of something happening triggers a lot of fear about what might happen when it happens. Obamacare. Remember death panels? All the Supreme Court cases, Mitt Romney saying that with Obamacare it would be inches from losing America's free enterprise system entirely. The Tea Party. All feels real quaint. Now we have Obamacare. Not only is it fine, but the right has stopped worrying about it. Because it's fine, it's good, it's healthcare. You have to do this stuff well. I'm not saying you can't do affordable housing badly, but where I live in New York, I live on the same street as a absolutely gigantic NYCHA housing project.
Is that a public?
Yeah, it's public housing.
Okay.
New York just has a lot more public housing. And it's fine. We did that it's huge, and there are sometimes problems, but they do a good job, with security and everything else. And I walk through there all the time, and it's great. And it actually means I live in a genuinely mixed income neighborhood. You have to do this well, right? You actually have to do the social services well. I understand why people are nervous about these things. But what's amazing about where the California politicians have let themselves get, and so many liberal politicians, is that while they are trying to forestall the short-term pain of actually building housing, everybody is furious at the outcome that they have collectively allowed to happen. Yeah, they don't want the affordable housing, but they also don't want the homelessness problem. Yeah, they don't want you to build the apartment building, although if they did, they would get over it, which is how things work in Austin and Houston and Dallas. And you know what they're not doing in Austin and Houston and Dallas is turning out their mayors every cycle. Whereas in San Francisco, London Breed just lost. And in here, it's more for the fires probably, but Bass is not doing well. And in Oakland, they recalled their mayor. So there's a weird thing where Democrats keep like blanching at short-term political pain and then absorbing huge long-term political pain. If Gavin Newsom had solved California's housing crisis, he wouldn't have to have Charlie Kirk on his podcast.
He said he wanted a Marshall Plan on housing.
So what?
He said he wanted to have a Marshall Plan on housing in
Right.
California
Like,
8 years ago.
These high-risk plays come because he can't go around the country and say, look, we did it in California. Elect me and I'll do it for the country. So I think they're getting the politics wrong. We see places all the time where you can build homes. Tokyo, Houston, right? Like we got a lot of them. Tennessee. The political equilibrium works just fine. When people have the tools to block things they don't like, they will. If they don't, they will complain and get over it. And yeah, then if you do a bad job governing social services and security and other things, then they'll be mad at you, as they should be, because you did a bad job. But this idea that the politics of building houses is impossible, when it's like, just drive that way for a little while, it's not. They let this happen. And now every California politician's career is basically screwed. It's just a crazy situation. And I kind of understand like how you get to be a politician so risk averse that you let it keep going. But on the other hand, as ambitious people, I don't. Because none of them from here on out are able to achieve the success they need to get to the next step. I'll say this last thing, and then we'll end on this weird note I'm about to offer you. I remember in the 2020 cycle, I listened to a podcast that Eric Garcetti gave with David Axelrod. I was like, that dude has the riz. Like, that is good. Like, that is the best politician interview I have heard in years. It's worth going back and looking up. Listen to how he tells his political story. It's amazing. It's like, I'm going to spend some more time with that guy, so I came out, and I went around with him for a day. I was like, he's good. And he wanted to run for president. And you might say, well, it doesn't work to run for president as a mayor. And I might introduce you to Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
A Rhodes Scholar who governed a town that had 47 people in it. And I'll tell you the moment I knew it wasn't going to work for Garcetti. He was on CNN, and the anchor was like, Mayor, you have a huge typhoid outbreak among your homelessness population. He's like, no, we have the national average of typhus typhoid in the homelessness population. I was like, all right, this isn't gonna fly. You can't run on failure. You can maybe survive on it in the job you're in, but you can't run on it. And like the moment California's politicians really get that and get that the short-term pain would be better than the long-term failure is like the moment this will begin to change. Thank you all.